Alright, so I just finished watching One Punch Man Season 3 Episode 1, and honestly, I would say I have quite a lot of thoughts. I mean, like, it is pretty much what I was expecting, but at the same time, it's not nearly as bad as people are making it out to be. This episode had some really strong points visually in terms of the tone and also the overall usage of soundtrack, but also some stuff that, let's be honest, felt off. So yes everyone, in this video, I want to break down my honest thoughts on the art, the animation, and the overall vibe of this episode alone. So without further ado, don't forget to subscribe and like, and let's get straight into my thoughts on it. Alright, so after watching the entirety of the first episode itself, I personally think that the best way to describe my feelings on it is a bit mixed, but not in a bad way. Like, I walk away and then just kinda surprised, and I'm both impressed and a little bit concerned at the same time. Obviously, the first thing that really hit me right away was just how good the art looked. And I'm not kidding when I say the character art this episode was remarkably solid. I mean, like, considering the fact that there's only 2 animation directors and it is the first episode, they are trying their best to make it as polished as possible. But at the same time, given how chaotic the production has been behind the scene, I would say it looked way better than I thought. The characters in general had this very heavy line work and also bold outlines, which I have pointed out in my reaction. And also sometimes a pretty eye-pleasing shading that really gave this really cool gritty vibe to the entirety of the episode. It's actually one of those things where even if nothing is moving, the visuals themselves carry a certain impact. Like, the still frame looks good enough to screenshot and goes, oh, the person that drew this really went all in on the drawing quality. Now, of course, not every drawing, not every character that was drawn was perfect. There were a few spots where you could see the off-model part of it, in which I'm guessing that the animation director didn't get enough time to actually fix it. So there will be those off-model shot and slightly uneven face. But honestly, it didn't really get me or take me out of the experience other than the black shine one. It's just me wondering if his face has always been like that or there's some kind of a design change, since I'm not really that into the manga of One Punch Man yet, so I didn't really know what's happening behind the scene and all that. But the overall look were actually pretty strong. It's actually pretty solid, and seeing those small flaws didn't really matter much personally, and I would say it actually stood out to me. It doesn't look like the stuff just went out of their way to release the first episode without having to maintain a certain standard throughout the episode, because even some still shot looks really good. Again, I really like how they're using the thick and heavy line work, the bold one. It really makes the character stand out more, and also the overall compositing really helped a lot. So yes, I'd easily say that the artwork was the strongest part of the entire episode. Even if everything else kind of fluctuates in quality later on, the visuals at least gave me hope that the people behind it actually care. You can see the effort in the drawings themselves, and that's always something I respect. But obviously, when we're talking about anime, animation matters. Now, here's where things get a little bit complicated. Well, because while the drawing were honestly really strong, the actual motion in this episode, yeah, not exactly the highlight. For a good portion of the episode, things were pretty static overall. Like, a lot of scenes were just solid character art with little to no movement. Yes, as you guys said, kind of like a PowerPoint slideshow at times. And honestly, I don't think that was purely out of quote-unquote laziness. It feels more like a production choice born out of limitation. There were some attempts at motion, of course. You had subtle character acting from Fubuki, but those are pretty much it. While a lot other felt very limited, and at the same time, the moments that did move, not all of them were convincing. There was this one walking sequence with Garo that really caught my eyes, and not just me, pretty infamous I would say. Like, the way he's walking, yes, as I've said, that perspective will look really bad if the execution is not that good, and it actually shows. Even with the actual movement itself, it looks really stiff. Personally, in terms of storyboarding, which I will get into in a bit, they shouldn't have used this type of perspective or this type of framing if the execution is not going to be that good. Which again, I am pretty sure Shin Nagai, the storyboarder of this episode, were trying his best to complete the storyboard as fast as they can, but at the same time, if the overall execution does not reach that standardized quality, I feel like it's going to be a really weird looking scene. And that's exactly what happened in the Garo walking scene. But again, that being said, it wasn't all doom and gloom. There were moments where the animation team clearly wanted to show that they still had some spark. Again, this scene of Fubuki is a pretty simple one. It's a pretty nice looking, bouncy character acting, and we've seen that in the PV itself. You could tell that some care was actually put into that specific cut. And not only that, Fubuki also is the most animated in the actual episode itself. There are some still shots of Fubuki where parts of her hair and also body, but again, it is a still shot. This is exactly what Aoki was talking about on one of his tweets, where he talks about it's pretty tricky to do those type of animation, which again kind of reflects to how most of Fubuki's scenes in the actual episode itself has a little bit of motion in it. Even though it is minor, you can still see that the animation are there. But again, it's not exactly the Sakuga everyone wanted. It did have a few moments where you could sense the effort. It's just that overall, the lack of motion was a bit more noticeable compared to how a usual anime episode is being presented. Because when you have great stills and solid art, your eye automatically expects that energy to translate into animation. And well, when it doesn't, it kind of leaves this small empty space. But again, considering everything we know, this scuff production, I'm not even that mad. I just wish the animation side had a bit more flow to complement how great the drawing quality already were. Now, an anime episode will not be complete without the direction and storyboarding, because this is honestly where things gets pretty interesting for me. When I was reacting live, one of the first thing I mentioned was how surprisingly well the Puri Puri prison scene was storyboarded. The way they're using the angle through his thigh, to be honest, the overall scene and the way the comedy is being conveyed in that scene actually matched his personality really well. It gave off the vibe that, okay, this episode might actually be trying something. And the way everything was being presented in that particular scene alone was just really good enough to sell the joke and was genuinely fun to watch. But then as the episode went on, I started noticing a pattern in which a lot of other scenes didn't quite have that same spark. Like this Amaimasu and Atomic Samurai scene, this one in particular felt a bit rough. The overall scene where Amaimasu was talking and then it just pans out towards Atomic Samurai is literally one-to-one to the manga. And that is when it hit me. A lot of this episode feels like it's just a copy of the manga. But I mean, don't get me wrong, I don't have a problem with manga accurate adaptation. But when you're literally replicating compositions one-to-one, it starts to lose the point of an anime adaptation. Anime should have its own way of conveying the message, its own way of telling a scene. Even if the story stays the same, the anime should feel a bit fresh. Here, it kind of felt like the team just didn't have any much room to reinterpret anything at all. You could almost sense that Shin Nagai in this episode is trying to stay faithful to the source but being boxed by how the production is being handled. Again, he did mention that he's trying his best to cut the usage of production time so that they can work more on the actual episode itself. So seeing that, it's already a sign of him, even though he is a really fast storyboarder, overall look of it or how ambitious a storyboard will be is not going to be reflected really well in the actual anime itself, and that shows in the first episode itself. The Puri Puri Prison scene is literally one of the best in the actual episode itself, and it's not good when I need to pick a scene that doesn't really have that much of a correlation to the actual episode itself. But again, it just lacked that extra layer of direction that really makes a scene come alive. So yes everyone, direction wise, I'd say the episode was pretty functional. It told the story it needed to tell, but it did not really elevate it at all. Now, Something that really was elevated was the soundtrack and overall tone of the actual episode itself, and also the voice actors and voice actress. But again, obviously it's going to get elevated because there's none of those in the manga itself. But for real though, the music direction, the sound direction was one of the stronger parts of this premiere. Again, you have good drawings and also good music. Even though the episode didn't have tons of movement or action, the way the background music was used actually gave it weight. It felt serious and also raw at times. You could definitely tell the team really wanted to set the tone for the season in a way that it felt like it is something darker, more grounded, and maybe a bit more mature in pacing. And since some people were actually expecting crazy fight animation right away, this episode seemed more interested in re-establishing the atmosphere and tension of the story, which again, the soundtrack played a massive role in that. When the characters were having tense moments, the soundtrack was used really well. And at the same time, when the comedic or calmer scenes hit, the overall vibe of the actual episode itself shifts entirely. So yes everyone, the soundtrack, the seiyus were easily one of the biggest highlights for me since they helped create this atmosphere where even if the visuals weren't constantly moving, the tone still felt right. Now let's talk about the editing and overall scene flow, the transition and all that, because this is something that really stood out to me. I think most people who watch episode 1 probably noticed that the editing choice were interesting. Like there were moments where it felt like the episode suddenly shifted tone or cut to another scene way faster than you'd expect. Some of these transitions genuinely caught me off guard, not necessarily in a bad way, but in a way that, wait, what? Kind of way. It's as if the editor was trying to keep things moving, but the cuts didn't always land as smoothly as they could have. Editing in anime is tough, especially when your episode doesn't have animation or movement to work with. You've got to rely on the pacing, the music, and scene order to make it flow naturally. But here, some parts were really jarring. There are moments where a serious tone suddenly shifts to a comedic effect, which might have been intentional, like they were trying to keep the episode from feeling too heavy. Since some cuts make me think like, oh, okay, that's probably for the laugh. But then right after that, you'd have a scene that just feels rough in how it transitions. Like it wasn't quite sure what tone it wanted to stick with. So it just goes like, what? Did I just skip a chapter or something? Cause it's that weird balance where certain edits or certain transition feels deliberate and others feel almost really rushed. And I'm not sure what's the reasoning behind it, because this is usually done during the post-production or because of the script writer or the series composition wrote it like that. But again, I don't really have an answer for this. It's just questionable. And also talking about scene, let's talk about the scene that was cut. Yes, the quote-unquote fight scene of the Reaper. It's not really a fight scene, he just like somehow destroy the kaiju number 8A looking group. I'm not sure that that particular part got skipped or restructured, cause maybe they cut it to reduce the workload or to make the episode flow better story-wise, but it's definitely noticeable. Again, during that particular scene, you can definitely see how much intimidating he is as a character rather than him just popping out of nowhere besides the other guy. But again, for now, I'm holding off on judging that too harshly since episode 2 might clarify if they just shifted things around. Maybe they just restructured it and then put it as the first scene of episode 2, who knows? But again, if it actually got cut, it's always unfortunate when something that was in the manga doesn't make in. But overall, in my reaction, it's an okay first episode. Not the strongest start ever, but not the disaster some people are making it out to be. Given what was adapted, it's solid enough to set the tone, even if it doesn't blow anyone away animation-wise. There's definitely room for improvement, and especially in terms of editing flow, storyboard, and animation consistency. But again, I still see the effort in the craft. The character art was polished, the OSTs were great, and there were glimpses of clever visual humor. So yes, not the greatest thing ever, but not the worst either. Just an uneven but honest start to what could still turn into something interesting later on. Alright, so to wrap it all up, I think this first episode of One Punch Man Season 3 lands somewhere right in the middle for me. It's not amazing, but it's not bad either. If I had to give it a number, I'd probably rate it a 6 out of 10. Now, while I do understand that this episode serves more as a build-up episode, I don't really think that should be an excuse for it to be handled this way. Build-up episode can still be visually interesting. They can still carry some weight, and they can still leave a lasting impression even without flashy action scenes. And that's kind of where this episode struggles. It feels like it's trying to stay completely safe, following the manga panel by panel, but in doing so, it loses some of the spark an anime adaptation should have. While it is a bit disappointing because you can tell that the staff here are trying their best under the really rough production circumstances, but the art is genuinely great. The OST placement is solid and the tone feels overall just as what I was expecting. But when you combine that with how static some of the scenes are and the weird editing choices and also really stiff animation here and there, it just doesn't leave the strongest impression as a first episode. So yes, overall a decent start, not the greatest but definitely not the worst. A 6 out of 10 seems fair for now. And look, I also want to make something clear, I am not here to justify every decision the production made or to pretend that it is perfect. I personally think One Punch Man as an IP deserves one of the best treatment possible, and the team working on this clearly has a lot on their plate. And I just don't want to pile on unnecessary hate when people are trying their best to bring the story to life. Just like what I said, constructive criticism is always fine. That's how things has been improving, and that's exactly what I'm trying to do in this video. I'm trying to give a proper constructive criticism rather than rage baiting or mocking the show just for clicks. Because these are real animators and stuff giving their time, energy, and sanity just so we can see this fictional bold man punches someone through the wall. So yes everyone, those are my honest thoughts on episode 1 itself. While I'm not going to pretend that it is quote-unquote perfect, I genuinely see that they are trying behind the scene. But at the end of the day, I'm still hopeful for what's coming next. The episode might have stumbled a bit, but it's not beyond staving. And I really want to believe that the team behind One Punch Man Season 3 still can find their rhythm as the show moves forward. And yes everyone, as an anime only watcher, I do have quite expectation for this arc, so let's hope they're able to adapt this very well. But yes, thank you very much for watching this video now, and let me know what you guys think about the episode 1 itself, and please do let me know and give some criticism towards my reaction because I really need those. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye!